Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 55th episode of GT Masters, in particular on Gran Turismo Sport, and this time we're featuring another new exclusive car to the Gran Turismo franchise, a fictionalized racing version of the Hyundai Genesis. This is a Group 3 class machine. There is also a Group 4 version, which is of course not quite as quick, and we still have the normal Hyundai Genesis carried over from Gran Turismo 6. Now, this may seem to be one of those race cars which, if you're not familiar with the Hyundai Genesis as a performance car, maybe you haven't driven it on Gran Turismo 6 for instance, you might not understand why this is a significant car. The Hyundai Genesis is very easy to underestimate, partially because it's a Hyundai. Hyundai, as great as they are, and they do make great cars, I would say are in a similar kind of camp as companies like Kia or even Skoda, in as much as they actually do make very good performance cars, but people just don't think of the company for performance cars. So they tend to be a little bit overshadowed by more obvious choices of manufacturer and model, and that kind of makes them sleeper cars to some degree. Now, the Genesis has very quickly made a name for itself over a relatively short time period as being a fantastic alternative to stuff like the Nissan Fairlady Z. And it really is a great alternative to that, or to an Infiniti, for instance, the G37. It's a great alternative to cars like that. And on Gran Turismo 6, as an example, it can be tuned to over 800 horsepower. It can do over 260 miles per hour, and it's a fantastic drift car as well. So it's got the kind of raw ability that many JDM cars have, but it's not necessarily afforded the respect that most JDM cars get, and that's unfortunate. At least it would be, except for those of us who do know about it. We get the good end of the deal, because we know that the Genesis is a great car, and we make full use of that. Now, in racing form on GT Sport, it's available in two alternate versions. There's the Group 4, which we will be covering in a future episode, which is kind of the GT24, GT4, N24 kind of race car spec, where it has some visual upgrades, but it's not that heavily modified. It has more of a focus on lowering the weight rather than increasing the power, that kind of thing. This Group 3 version, though, is different. It's a full-on total racing machine. And I don't know about you guys, but this car's design reminds me very much of the Genesis LM race car from Forza 3, which is also, of course, a fictional machine. Coincidence? Who knows? Possibly, but the livery is very similar, the body kit is even very similar, the car itself, in terms of its ability, is even fairly similar. Now, speaking of ability, what can this car do? Well, as far as engine capacity goes, first of all, we're not actually told, but you can safely assume that it's probably a 3.8 litre, or thereabouts. That's what the road version is, so most likely they use that as its base. In terms of power and torque, of course, polyphony, like with some others, such as the Jaguar F-Type, they can pretty much make the specs whatever they want because it's not a real race car. Now, what they chose to do with this one is a pretty nice level of spec. It doesn't have a huge amount of torque, 374 foot-pounds, but it's certainly enough to get the job done. And the power is also easily good enough to take on many other cars in the Group 3 class at 545 horsepower, which incidentally arrives at 8,000 RPM. So it's a pretty rev-happy engine. It likes to be worked, of course, and the weight is also pretty good. It's not ultra-light, but 1,200 kilos certainly isn't bad. Again, a very familiar number for Gran Turismo's fictional cars on Gran Turismo Sport. Many of them have that kind of weight of 1,200 kilos, and the horsepower per tonne is 454 on this particular version. Now, as a point of reference, that's a little bit more, 2 horsepower per tonne more in fact, than the Mercedes SLS GT3. So that's a pretty good level for this car to be working at. Of course, as with all of the other models, for now at least, we're not told what its price will be, but unless they go down the Super GT 500 route of having them all cost the same, which Gran Turismo is known for, I would not be at all surprised if this was a little bit cheaper than many of the other cars. I'm not going to say how much I think it could be, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is a significantly cheaper car even than some of the other models, maybe even half the price. That would not surprise me at all. Now, in terms of ability, It's a good car, but it's not necessarily as great within its class as the road version is. For road-going coupes with a lot of power, the Genesis is an excellent choice. It kind of mixes the best of both worlds between American coupes and Asian coupes, and it blends the two really, really well. In racing forms, in both Group 4 and Group 3 classes, it doesn't feel quite as strong. It's still good, but it's not necessarily in, say, the top quarter of the pack. Not for me personally, at least. It's definitely in the top half of the pack, so it's good, but it's not the best of the best kind of thing. The handling is good. There's still a hint of that tail happiness there, which isn't surprising given that the Genesis already is a great drift car in road form, and I would say the Genesis road car is one of the best drifters on GT Sport currently, but the race car does carry a little bit of that over. Obviously, with the extra downforce, the wider track, the lower weight, it handles itself better, as you'd assume. It's no TVR, that's for sure, but the performance doesn't necessarily feel as sharp as something like a GTR, for instance, or a Renault RS01, or an Alfa Romeo 4C even. That being said, it's not a bad car by any means. It can definitely give you victories, and it seems like an obvious thing to say that. Of course a Group 3 car can give you victories, that's the whole point. It wouldn't be in the same class as the others if it couldn't at least have a chance of winning. But the simple fact is there are some cars which will win more often. Your GTRs, for instance, will often dominate the classes that they're featured in, and the Genesis could be that kind of vehicle as well. On this occasion, I'm going to say it's not. Not quite. It's close, but not quite. For those who do love the Genesis though, myself included, it's not a disappointing car at all, and it's nice to finally have a full-on racing version of this, which we can actually take on some of the big dogs of the class in. And I personally definitely plan to use this car quite a bit in the full game. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.